The first hint that my college life wouldn't be the academic refuge I planned for came in the form of loud music and laughter echoing in the dorm hall. There I was, Alex Davis, 19, carefully arranging my books in alphabetical order when the door burst open like a hurricane had decided to drop by the third floor of East Residence. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. I've always been the invisible kid. The type who spends time in libraries instead of at parties, who prefers the quiet of Dostoevsky's pages over the clamor of a crowd. I earned a full scholarship to study comparative literature, my ticket to escape the stifling monotony of Lima, Ohio, where I grew up feeling like a foreigner. I arrived at California State University with a perfectly structured plan. Keep the scholarship with impeccable grades, avoid social distractions, and finally meet people who understood my passion for 19th century Russian literature. My mom cried on the day of goodbye, worried that her introverted son wouldn't survive the college jungle. My dad, always practical, simply patted my shoulder and said, "Don't waste this opportunity on nonsense, Alex." I had no intention of wasting a single minute. Every minute was to be devoted to study. If you've ever felt like you don't belong anywhere, maybe you'll understand why the promise of a single room meant so much to me. It was the only place where I could truly be myself, without judgments, without inquisitive stares, without having to explain why I'd rather spend a Saturday night deciphering poetry than going to raucous parties. But the university bureaucracy had other plans for me. The dorm was smaller than the photos on the website suggested, a functional rectangle with 2 beds pressed against opposite walls, 2 desks, a fridge humming persistently, and a shared bathroom that barely fit one person. The single window framed the sports training field perfectly, reminding me daily of a world I didn't belong to. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check out the link in the description right away. I established a routine that was immune to social interactions during my first 48 hours. I woke at 5:30 while the campus was still asleep. The bathroom was empty, the cafeteria nearly deserted. Just a few sleepy staff members and some engineering students sporting dark circles. The library opened at 7, and I was always the first in, greeting Ms. Patel with a shy wave as she unlocked the doors. The smell of old books became my favorite cologne. The soft creak of wooden shelves was my background music. Within those walls lined with knowledge, I could finally breathe without the weight of social anxiety crushing my chest. I stayed there until dusk, leaving only for classes and for picking up a sandwich that I ate discreetly between the stacks of medieval literature. I returned to the dorm only after I was sure most students had already had dinner. Those 2 hours of solitude in my room were precious. Time to organize my notes, catch up on readings, and write diary entries about Tolstoy that no one else would ever seem to appreciate. After that, a quick shower, brush my teeth, and sleep before any noisy roommate returned from night activities. Perfect. Predictable. Safe. Until the third day, when my self-imposed isolation bubble spectacularly burst. The hall was shaking with music that I vaguely recognized as by some popular indie band. Our door, one I always kept locked, was wide open. I hesitated, frozen between the need to escape and the indignation of having my space invaded. "You must be the literature kid," a deep voice called before I could even fully step in. "I'm Ryan Mitchell. Looks like we're roommates for the semester." Ryan was everything I wasn't. Tall, athletic, with that kind of golden beauty you only see in teen movies. Disheveled blonde hair falling over intense blue eyes, and a smile that had probably won over half the campus. The college football team captain was unloading piles of boxes and gleaming trophies all over the room. "There was a leak in the sports dorm," he explained, tossing an enormous backpack onto the bed that until now had been empty. "Emergency relocation. I hope you don't mind a bit of noise." My voice came out almost as a whisper. "Actually, I study a lot, so no problem, man." Ryan cranked up the music even louder as he spoke. "I can use headphones when you're studying. Sometimes." In less than 20 minutes, his side of the room transformed into a showcase of college social life. Posters of sports teams, pictures of parties filled with smiling faces, training gear, and a small fridge that immediately filled up with energy drinks and protein powder. "Are you always this quiet?" he asked as he hung up a giant team flag right in the middle of the wall, clearly encroaching on my space. "We're gonna work on that. I can't have a roommate who doesn't know how to have fun." I swallowed hard, already calculating how many extra hours in the library I'd need to make up for this disaster. As he unpacked an even larger Bluetooth speaker, Ryan kept going on about parties, games, and something about being the team's technical assistant while studying sports administration. My dad played professionally for the Chargers, he casually mentioned, as if that explained his absurd trophy collection. I've got big expectations to live up to, you know. No, I didn't know. My dad's expectations were limited to high grades and a steady job after graduation. Nothing about sports glory or legacies to maintain. That first night, I stayed awake until late, staring at the ceiling as Ryan snored softly on the other side of the room. How on earth would I survive a whole semester with someone who embodied everything I had always tried to avoid? I made it through the first week by resorting to defensive adjustments. I woke up even earlier. I came back even later. I wore headphones constantly. It was like a carefully choreographed dance to avoid collisions. The disaster happened on a rainy Tuesday. I rushed into the room, drenched from a sprint from the library during a sudden downpour. Ryan was sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers. "This storm came out of nowhere, huh?" he remarked without looking up. I mumbled something unintelligible while shaking my broken umbrella. That's when I noticed my unfinished breakfast on the table. The mug was too unstable, sitting too close to the edge. I tried to grab it, but my sudden movement caused exactly what I feared. The brown liquid cascaded over the table, soaking all of Ryan's notes. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, horrified. Instead of the explosion of anger I expected, Ryan just sighed. "That was my presentation for tomorrow. The coach is going to kill me." Guilt immediately overwhelmed me. "I can retype it for you. I have neat handwriting and I type fast." He looked at me surprised, as if that was the first full sentence he'd ever heard me say. "Really? You'd do that?" We spent the entire night working together. Ryan dictated his soaked notes while I typed and organized everything in a new document. Around midnight, when we were both exhausted, he casually mentioned, "I'm watching that documentary series about ancient civilizations. The one on History Channel." "Forgotten Empires?" I asked, suddenly a bit excited. "Have you seen the episode on Babylon?" His eyes lit up. "It's my favorite. But don't tell the guys on the team. They'd make fun of me all the way to graduation." It was like finding a rare book hidden on an ordinary shelf. Behind the popular team captain was someone who genuinely cared about ancient history. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. Ryan lowered the music volume when he saw me studying. I stopped using my strong scented fabric softener when he mentioned his allergy. He began bringing extra coffee from the cafeteria on those mornings when I stayed up late studying. I started leaving little sticky notes with study tips on subjects he found hard. A week later, I caught myself waiting to head back to the dorm instead of lingering in the library. "Mr. Davis, we need to talk about your roommate." The academic coordinator, Dr. Reynolds, called me into her office on a Thursday. Her words immediately set off my internal alarm. "Ryan Mitchell has been turning in surprisingly well-crafted assignments these past few weeks," she continued, her eyes assessing my reaction behind thick square glasses. "Assignments that show an understanding of literary references that doesn't match his previous academic record." My stomach dropped as I realized the insinuation. "Are you saying I've been doing his work?" "I'm just investigating a notable discrepancy," she replied curtly. "It would be unfortunate if your scholarship was jeopardized for unfairly helping another student." My anger momentarily overpowered my shyness. "Ryan is a lot smarter than people think. We study together, but each assignment is his own work." I left that office trembling, not from fear, but from anger. The same anger I'd seen in Ryan's eyes when I told him about the conversation that night. "Everyone always expects the bare minimum from me," he vented while punching his pillow. "Being an athlete means you're dumb, right? Can't even form a complex thought? At least they see you," I blurted out without thinking. "To them, I'm just the weird nerd who can't hold eye contact for more than 3 seconds." It was the first time we openly talked about our insecurities. Ryan revealed the crushing pressure he felt, from his ex-pro athlete dad who measured his worth in yards gained, from friends who expected him to stick to the carefree leader persona, from teachers who treated him like a lost cause with an athletic scholarship. "Sometimes I just want to scream that I'm more than that," he confessed, sitting on the edge of the bed and gazing out the window at the lit training field. "That there's a fully functioning brain behind this handsome face." He smiled wryly at the end. For the first time I saw beyond the confident captain's facade. There was a guy as lost as I was, only wearing a different mask. In the following weeks, obstacles mounted. The coach started questioning why Ryan spent less time hanging out with the team. My literature classmates gave curious looks when they saw me talking with him in the hallways. Each world was pulling its representative back into its designated role. One night, I found Ryan quickly tucking away what looked like a letter. His face betrayed an unusual disturbance. "My dad is coming to the game on Saturday," he explained before I could ask. "He suggested I stop wasting time on academic distractions and focus on what really matters." "And what really matters?" I asked, my throat tightening. Ryan stared at me for a long moment before answering. "That's the question I've been asking myself lately." That night, we both stayed up long after the lights were out, each in our own bed, separated by only a few feet of physical space and a chasm of social expectations. Saturday arrived loaded with expectations. The big game against our state rivals drew a crowd to campus, including Ryan's dad, a tall, imposing man who seemed to take up the entire space of our tiny dorm during his brief visit before the match. For the first time, I saw Ryan genuinely nervous, stumbling over his words while his father inspected the room with barely concealed disapproval. "So, this is your roommate?" Mr. Mitchell asked, eyeing me as if he could make me vanish between the pages of my books. "Alex," Ryan replied, the tension evident in his voice. "He's been helping me out with some classes. I just hope he's not distracting my son from his real priorities, Mr. Mitchell said directly to me, his tone making it clear that real priorities didn't include anything about books. I mumbled something about Ryan being a dedicated student, but my words seemed to vanish in the heavy air. Before leaving, Ryan's dad clapped a heavy hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Trojan Scouts will be watching today. Don't waste this opportunity." After he left, Ryan sat in silence for several minutes, meticulously readjusting his spotless cleats. "I'm going to watch the game," I announced suddenly, surprising us both. Ryan looked up, clearly shocked. "You hate crowds. And sports." "I don't hate sports," I immediately corrected. "I just never understood the appeal of watching people throw themselves around for a ball." A faint smile flickered on his face. "Well, today you'll see people throwing themselves around with purpose and strategy." It was the first time I set foot in the college stadium. The noise was deafening, and the sea of painted faces in the stands left me momentarily disoriented. I found a spot in the farthest, most secluded corner, hidden among a group of engineering students who looked just as out of place as I felt. During the game, my eyes rarely left the number 17 moving gracefully across the field, a grace I'd never noticed before. Ryan played as though he had something to prove, intense, focused, almost desperate. In the final quarter, with the score tied, I caught the exact moment he glanced over at the stands, where his dad sat rigid and unmoved beside the scouts. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ryan hesitated for a split second before making a bold pass instead of playing it safe. The ball was intercepted. The opposing team scored. We lost by 7 points. The locker room must have been silent, but I wasn't there to witness it. I waited nearly 2 hours back in the dorm, alternating between trying to read and compulsively checking the door. When I finally gave up and decided to sleep, I heard the sound of a key in the lock. Ryan entered like a contained storm, soaked by the rain that had just started falling, his face a hardened mask of repressed emotions. He didn't say a word as he dropped his sports bag on the floor. His hands trembled. "It was a good game," I tried, aware how feeble my words sounded. "It was shit and you know it," he replied flatly, avoiding my gaze. "My dad's already gone home. Said he'd seen enough." I was speechless, watching him pace around the room like a caged animal. Finally, he sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his wet hair. "Do you know what's worse?" he said softly, almost cracking. "For 1 second, right before that pass, I thought about you in the stands. I wondered what you'd see. Whether you'd analyze the game like you do your books, looking for deeper meaning." He gave a humorless laugh. And in that moment of distraction, I threw it all away. I moved closer hesitantly and took a seat beside him, leaving a few inches of space between us. "Ryan, you're more than just a football game. Not for my dad, not for the team, and definitely not for this college. Not for me." The words slipped out before I could hold them back. Ryan finally looked at me, really looked, as if he was seeing me for the first time. The vulnerability in his eyes hit me like a physical blow. It was so different from the confidence he usually displayed. So raw it hurt. "What do you see when you look at me, Alex?" he whispered. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The air between us felt charged with something we'd been dancing around for weeks without naming. "I see someone who loves ancient history and those boring documentaries that nobody else watches," I began, my voice betraying my nervousness. "I see someone who brings me coffee on mornings when I'm up studying late, even though they know I hate early wake-ups. I see someone who pretends to be exactly what everyone expects, but who's so much more complicated than anyone imagines. As I spoke, I found myself leaning toward him, like a plant reaching for the sun. Ryan stayed still. His eyes never left mine, his breathing visibly changing. "What do you see when you look at me?" I returned the question, my voice barely a whisper. Ryan swallowed, the movement in his throat mesmerizing. "I see someone who makes me want to be better. Not better for my dad or for the team or for the scouts, better for me." His hand found mine in the small space between us, his fingers entwining with mine gently despite his physical strength. The touch sent warm waves through my arm, making my already racing heart beat even faster. Our first kiss was tentative, a silent question we'd both been too scared to ask before. I caught a whiff of his familiar scent, a mix of soap, rain, and something uniquely his. I felt the roughness of a day's stubble against my skin. I felt his breath quiver as we briefly pulled apart, both of us processing what had just happened. "Alex," his name on his lips sounded like a revelation. "Me neither," I replied, understanding exactly what he meant without needing to finish. His eyes searched mine as if asking for permission or confirmation. I nodded slightly before he could even ask, and then there was nothing between us. The second kiss was different. The initial hesitation gave way to an urgency that surprised us both. Ryan's hands, normally so sure on the field, trembled just a bit as they caressed my face, as if mapping out a precious and uncharted territory. My fingers, used to carefully turning pages, now tangled in his hair, still damp from the rain. "You sure about this?" Ryan whispered against my lips, his voice husky with contained emotion. In response, I pulled him closer. Words had never been my strong suit, but at that moment, my body spoke with a fluency I'd never found in any book. We tumbled together onto his narrow bed, the mattress creaking in protest. Everything felt new, yet oddly familiar, like recognizing a place you'd only seen in your dreams. His shirt was still damp from the rain, clinging to the body he'd sculpted through years of training. My fingers hesitated on the fabric's hem, a final barrier of doubt that Ryan dissolved as he guided my hands, encouraging me to explore. The contrast between his chiseled body and my slender frame sparked a forbidden dance of opposites coming together. And when our breaths synchronized at the peak of that intimate moment, I understood why some rules exist only to be gloriously broken. Ryan touched me as if he were reading Braille, his fingers deciphering every inch of my skin like a sacred text. I let out a sigh as his lips found that sensitive spot on my neck and shoulder. I felt his smile against my skin, the genuine pleasure of someone who had just made an important discovery. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his gaze intense in a way that should have made me uncomfortable but only stoked the growing heat between us. So different from everything I've ever known. His words unlocked something within me, a courage I hadn't known I possessed. I reversed our positions with a determination that clearly surprised him. Ryan's intense blue eyes widened for a moment, a flash of vulnerability on his usually confident face that made me want to protect him and challenge him at the same time. "I always thought I was the shy one," he remarked, with a sidelong smile as he pulled me down against his chest. "Me too," I confessed, feeling the rapid pulse of his heart under my hand. "I guess you bring out parts of me I didn't even know existed." Our bodies came together like waves crashing on the shore, a natural rhythm neither of us had to teach the other. What began as cautious exploration turned into a passionate dance of mutual discovery. With every touch, every sigh, every muffled murmur against skin, we were building a language that was entirely our own. Ryan, always seen as the leader and protector, let himself be vulnerable in my arms. And I, forever hidden behind books and silence, found a voice I never knew I had. As we moved together in the dark, the boundaries between us melted away. We were no longer just the confident captain and the reclusive scholar, but two souls recognizing each other on a deep level. In one crystalline moment, at the peak of our connection, our eyes locked. A dive so deep into each other's souls that it stood out even in the whirlwind of physical sensations. It was in that look that I realized what we were sharing went beyond the physical. It was understanding. It was liberation. The climax hit us almost simultaneously. A wave of sensations so intense that for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared completely. His name slipped from my lips like a prayer while his hands gripped mine tightly, as if fearing I might vanish. For several minutes after, we stayed entwined, our breaths gradually slowing, neither of us wanting to break the spell with clumsy words. Ryan traced invisible patterns on my back, and I counted the steady beats of his heart under my ear. Steadier now, though still racing. Outside, the rain continued to fall, creating a curtain of sound that isolated us from the rest of the world. Inside our small dorm, we had created our own universe with its own rules and meanings. That was... Ryan finally broke the silence, then paused as if no suitable words could be found. Yes, I agreed, fully understanding what he couldn't express. I woke up to the first rays of sunlight filtering through the window. For a moment, I was disoriented to realize I wasn't in my own bed. Ryan's arm rested heavily around my waist, his face peaceful in deep sleep. I watched him for a few moments. The usual lines of worry on his brow had disappeared, leaving him looking younger, lighter. The reality of last night hit me hard. I wasn't regretful, not in the slightest, but the weight of what it all meant began to accumulate in my mind. What did we mean to each other now? How would we handle this outside the safe confines of our dorm? As if sensing my restlessness, Ryan slowly opened his eyes. For one terrifying second, I feared I'd see regret there. Instead, a sleepy smile spread across his face. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still husky with sleep. "You sure overthink things. I can almost hear the cogs turning in your head." I couldn't help but smile. "It's what I do best." Ryan rested on one elbow, studying me with an intensity that made my heart race again. "About last night, we don't have to label it," I quickly interrupted, trying to shield myself from the rejection I feared was inevitable. "It was a moment. We were both emotionally vulnerable after the game, and..." His lips silenced my anxious rambling. A slow, deliberate, and surprisingly sweet kiss followed. "It wasn't just a moment for me," he said when we broke apart. "I'm not exactly sure what this is, Alex, but I know it's real and important." The knot in my chest loosened a bit. "Me too," I admitted. "But it's complicated." "When isn't it?" Ryan sighed, though there was no bitterness in his tone, just a resigned acceptance. We got up and tried to establish a new normal. Ryan went to take a shower first while I gathered the books scattered around the floor. Then we changed, moving through our shared space with a new awareness of one another. During a nearly empty Sunday breakfast in the cafeteria, we sat closer than usual, our legs occasionally brushing under the table. We talked about mundane things, pending assignments, the documentary we planned to watch that night, the forecast of more rain for the week. But underneath the casual conversation, something deep had shifted. Back in the dorm, Ryan closed the door and turned to me with a serious expression. "We need to talk about what comes next," he said, sitting on the edge of his bed and motioning for me to join him. I sat in front of him, our hands nearly touching in the small gap between us. The physical closeness was as comforting as it was electrifying. "I've never felt this for anyone before," Ryan began, his eyes fixed on mine with disarming honesty. "Man or woman, it's scary and amazing at the same time." "Me too," I confessed. "I always knew I was different, but never had the courage to explore it. Or maybe I never found someone who made me want to explore." Ryan smiled, a bittersweet smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "In my world, the football, the guys on the team, my dad, this isn't exactly accepted, I know. But I also don't want to pretend it didn't happen, or that it means nothing." I reached out and intertwined my fingers with his. "I'm not asking you to change your life or make some huge public declaration, Ryan. We can figure this out together, day by day. At least within these four walls for now." The relief on his face was tangible. "Within these four walls," he repeated, squeezing my hand. "For now." That afternoon, I helped Ryan study for an applied statistics exam. He convinced me to take a break from studying so we could watch that documentary we'd talked about. Our dynamic had shifted subtly. There was a newfound freedom in our touches, an intimacy in our glances, small moments of affection that before would have seemed unthinkable. Later, as we prepared for bed, Ryan hesitated for a moment before asking, "Can I stay with you tonight?" "Just sleep." I scooted over, making room on my narrow bed, and he lay down next to me, our bodies naturally fitting together like puzzle pieces. His arm circled my waist, pulling me close against his chest. "When I look back on my life," Ryan whispered in the darkness, "I realize I was always playing a part. The perfect son, the exemplary athlete, the popular guy. It was like I was stuck in a script written for me before I even knew who I was." I turned to face him, barely making out his features in the dark. "And now, for the first time, I feel like I'm writing my own story. Not knowing exactly where it'll go, but at least it's mine." His hand brushed my face, his thumb gently tracing my cheek. Wow! Something expanded in my chest. A feeling of possibility I'd never known before. I, who had always planned every detail of my academic life, was now on the most unpredictable journey ever. And strangely, I wasn't scared. Wow, I agreed, sealing the word with a kiss. In the days that followed, we figured out how to navigate this new reality. In public, we maintained a casual friendship. Ryan still sat with his team at lunch, and I still spent most of my day in the library. But in those small in-between moments, we built our own world. Discreet messages throughout the day, casual touches as we passed each other in the halls, study sessions that turned into deep conversations about our fears and dreams. And yes, moments of physical intimacy that continued to surprise us with their intensity. Ryan started showing me parts of campus I'd never explored. The empty training field at dawn, the rooftop of the science building with a view of the entire university, a little off-campus bookstore selling rare editions. I introduced him to my favorite corners of the library, to the poems that made me cry, to the authors who had shaped my view of the world. One particularly meaningful afternoon, I showed Ryan the diary I'd kept since I was 15. "I've never shown this to anyone," I admitted, as he carefully turned the pages filled with my tight handwriting. "Why me?" he asked, genuinely curious. I paused, searching for the right words. "Because you see me. You really see me. Not just the quiet nerd, or the antisocial weirdo, or any other label people have stuck on me over the years. You see beyond that." Ryan closed the diary reverently and set it down gently on the table. When he looked up at me, his eyes shone with an emotion that made my throat tighten. "It's funny," he said softly. "I spent my whole life being watched. By scouts, coaches, fans, my dad. But you're the first person who has ever really looked inside of me." That night, as we lay together in silence, I realized that what we had found in each other went far beyond the physical, beyond attraction, beyond even desire. It was understanding. Two souls that, against all odds, had found and truly seen one another. The notice came on an ordinary Tuesday, when we'd already settled into our comfortable routine. Ryan entered the room holding an official envelope from the college administration, his face a mix of conflicting emotions. "They've finished repairs in the sports dorm," he announced, his voice so neutral it hardly sounded like him. "I have to be back by the end of the week." Even though we expected it, after all, we knew his transfer was temporary. The news hit me like a stone in my stomach. Our little universe now had an expiration date. "I guess you're excited to go back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I realigned the books that were already perfectly in order. "I'm sure the rooms there are much bigger, and you'll be with your teammates." Ryan tossed the envelope onto the desk and stepped closer, gently taking the book from my trembling hands. "Alex, look at me." I reluctantly met his eyes, fearing he might see the rising panic I was desperately trying to hide. "I don't want to go back," I said simply. "But, listen," I continued, holding his hands between mine. "These last 2 months have been the most genuine of my life. For the first time, I'm not just living up to expectations or following a preset script. I'm discovering who I really am. And a big part of that is thanks to you." The warmth of his hands on mine was comforting, familiar. We had mapped out every inch of each other during our nights together, knowing every curve, every mark, every sensitive spot. The thought of losing that intimacy terrified me more than I cared to admit. "You could ask to stay," I suggested, hope tinting my voice against my better judgment. "I've thought about it," Ryan smiled. "I have a good relationship with the dorm coordinator. I could come up with some excuse about wanting to be closer to the library to boost my grades, or something like that." My heart raced at the possibility, but a more rational part of me pushed me to ask, "And what would people say? The guys on your team? Your friends? Your dad?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. Ryan released my hands and walked over to the window, watching the training field in the distance. His profile against the afternoon light looked chiseled, as strong as it was vulnerable. "I've been thinking about that a lot," he finally said. "About who I am versus who others expect me to be. About masks and authenticity." He turned back, his blue eyes shining with raw emotion. "I'm not ready to announce to the world what we are, and I'm not even sure I'd know how to define it properly. But I'm also not willing to give up just because it's complicated." I crossed the room toward him, summoning a courage I rarely felt. "So, what are we, Ryan? For each other?" His smile was soft, almost timid, a look that very few had ever seen on the confident captain's face. "We're the unexpected," he replied, touching my face reverently. "The story no one saw coming, not even us. The chapter that wasn't in the original script but changed the whole narrative." I rested my forehead against his, taking in his words. I like that definition. So, what do we do now? He asked, his fingers still interlaced with mine. I had no easy answer. Part of me wanted to ask him to stay and face any consequences together. Another part, the part that always calculated risks and avoided exposure, was scared of asking too much, too soon. What if, I began, choosing my words carefully, we don't treat this as a definitive decision right now? You return to the sports dorm as planned. We just keep what we have, adapting to the new logistics. Ryan seemed to mull it over. Study dates in the library after practice? The medieval literature section is practically empty, I offered with a small smile. I can book private study rooms as a technical assistant, he added, a mischievous glint in his eyes. And we still have weekends, I finished. Your roommate from the team isn't coming home too often to visit his girlfriend, right? Ryan's face lit up with possibility. So you're suggesting we have a secret relationship, Mr. Davis? Secret dates and coded messages? I couldn't help but laugh at his theatrically shocked look. I'm suggesting we create our own path, one that respects the time you need to figure out who you are and what you want, without pressure for public declarations or premature labels. Ryan pulled me even closer, his arms wrapping around my waist with familiarity. How did someone who barely talked to me 2 months ago become the most important person in my life? There was no need for an answer, but I felt compelled to say, maybe because you were the first person to really see me beyond the books and the shyness, and I was the first to see past the uniform and trophies. In that moment, with the setting sun casting long shadows through the room, we silently sealed our unspoken agreement. Ryan would return to the sports dorm, but what we had built would continue, evolving, adapting, enduring. On Friday, the official moving day, I helped Ryan pack his things. Every item taken off the wall, every piece of clothing neatly folded away, marked the end of our daily routine together. The room slowly reverted to its original layout. My organized, minimalist space occupying one side, and the other side strangely empty and impersonal, except for one detail. I want you to keep this, Ryan said, laying one of his favorite t-shirts on my bed, the same one I often wore on lazy Sunday mornings. Its fabric too big for my frame. Aren't you going to miss it? I asked, running my fingers over the soft material that still carried his familiar scent. It's a reminder, he replied with a smile, that there will always be a place for me to come back to. When the last book was packed and the final backpack zipped up, we stood in the middle of the room, suddenly hesitant. It's not goodbye, Ryan stated with a certainty that moved me. It's just a new chapter. A chapter we'll write together, I finished, surprised by my own confidence. His last kiss in the dorm was slow and deliberate, as if he were memorizing every sensation. When we pulled apart, all I saw in his eyes wasn't sadness, but determination, and something that looked remarkably like hope. 3 weeks passed since Ryan returned to the sports dorm. Contrary to my initial worries, we didn't drift apart. We just adapted. As planned, we found our moments and spaces. Study sessions in the library that often turned into much more when we were alone among the old books. Early morning walks across a nearly deserted campus. Occasional nights in my room when his roommate was away. In fact, there was something undeniably exciting about our carefully orchestrated meetings. The anticipation of seeing him walk into the library after practice, hair still damp from the shower. The adrenaline of a stolen kiss in a locked study room. The coded messages we sent each other during the day, seemingly innocent to anyone watching, but filled with a deep meaning just for us. Today, as I sit on my lonely bed flipping through my diary, rereading the entries from the past few months, it's almost unbelievable how much I've changed. The Alex from September, terrified at the thought of a loud social roommate, wouldn't recognize the Alex of November, a young man capable of deep feeling, willing to take emotional risks, and discovering parts of himself he never even knew existed. I write in my diary a reflection that has occupied my mind these past few days. I came to college thinking I knew my limits and boundaries. I built walls around me that I thought were impenetrable. Then someone came along who didn't try to tear those walls down. They simply built a door and waited patiently for me to open it. The most surprising part wasn't discovering that I could be attracted to someone so different from me, but realizing that the differences I feared were exactly what made our connections so meaningful. My phone vibrates with a message from Ryan. Meeting canceled. Study room 204 is free in 20 minutes. Bring that book of poetry you mentioned. I smile at the screen. Our little code. No poetry discussion is on the menu today. As I put away my diary and get ready to head out, I reflect on how the most transformative encounters often happen when you least expect them, with the people you'd never imagine. If someone had told me on the first day of class that I'd fall in love with the captain of the football team, I would have laughed at the absurdity. And yet here I am, discovering new parts of myself through the eyes of someone who, by all conventional logic, should have remained a stranger. Ryan and I are still writing our story, page by page, day by day. We don't know how it will end, if our relationship will eventually go public, if we'll face resistance from his teammates or his demanding dad, if we'll be able to balance our differences in the long run. But I've learned there's a peculiar beauty in not knowing the ending, in letting the story develop naturally, without forcing premature conclusions, in trusting the process and the genuine connection we share. As I head out from the dorm toward the library, I carry with me not only the anticipation of seeing Ryan, but also a new understanding of who I am. I'm not just the introspective scholar obsessed with Russian literature. I'm multifaceted, capable of passion, bravery, and a flexibility I never imagined. And Ryan isn't just the popular athlete living up to external expectations. He's complex, thoughtful, struggling to reconcile the many parts of his identity into a coherent image of himself. Together, we're discovering that the labels and categories society tries to pin on us rarely capture the true essence of who we are. That the deepest connections often transcend labels and expectations. As I climb the library steps, I feel a deep gratitude for that administrative mistake that placed the football team captain in my dorm. For the moment, he walked into my room and, unknowingly, into my life. Sometimes the most unexpected accidents lead us exactly where we need to be. The collisions of seemingly incompatible worlds create something new and extraordinary, and the people we think are completely different from us end up being the ones who help us discover who we truly are. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check out the link in the description right away. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. If you've ever found yourself connecting deeply with someone who seemed like your complete opposite, or discovered a relationship that defied every expectation you had before, know that you're not alone. The best stories never follow the expected script. And sometimes when someone just shows up in our meticulously planned and organized lives, that interruption may be exactly what we needed, even if we didn't know it.